All right. Hello, everyone. The professor here. So today I've got a very special guest. I've got Professor Siraj Shaikh, who is a professor in systems security. And we're going to talk about all things AI. So yeah, let's get into it. Hi,
Hi, Paul.
Siraj.
Hi,
Hello.
everyone.
Nice to see you. So perhaps you could
Likewise.
introduce yourself and maybe explain what system security is, because I'm not sure I know. And I've worked with you
Okay.
for ages. So
Right. Okay. Well, let's talk about that as well. So I'm a professor in system security at Swansea University. Well, prior to Swansea, I was at Coventry University, where I've had the pleasure of working with Paul for many, many years on some exciting stuff, of course. So, system security essentially came out of my understanding of cybersecurity over many years. I did a PhD in cybersecurity at a time when the term cyber was very new in a
mm,
sense. Now it's become part of kind of common language. But my understanding of cybersecurity for systems where we have to understand security from a systems perspective, where it's not just the technology of security, and this is we're talking about securing all kinds of systems here, but where security also has to take into account how we use those systems. So one example would be automotive systems, which is a class of systems that I work with very much. And so it's about how we build automotive systems, cars, their components, what supply chains look like for these systems, what policy or economic drivers there are for these systems. And when you study the usability of it, the economics of it, the policy of it, the engineering, alongside the usual technical and software side of things, you have to really appreciate a systems kind of a picture to appreciate security. And system security, in a sense, is an acknowledgement of that, but also then takes into account that security here isn't just about this, is about a particular automotive a vehicle or a component or a subsystem, but it is about also what it means to other stakeholders in society.
mm.
People who are manufacturing them, people who are regulating about them, people who are, ultimately owning them, using them, and so on. So, so I think system security is perhaps, in my view, a better representation of what a lot of cybersecurity is doing. But Paul, sorry to disappoint you. I mean, it is a label in a sense, which I've used, and I think a number of colleagues in the community and industry have kind of validated and acknowledged that view, and I've carried that forward. But beyond that, there is, nothing else, underneath it that I could say that this makes it, you know,
Yeah, I think
any
that
special.
I guess it makes sense. I guess one of the problems is as these systems grow and build and become more complex, that every time you add something new, you add another risk into it. I guess that am I right, or am I, or does the system sort of protect new things coming in? What I guess if you think about cars, automotive, you've obviously got each of the individual vehicles, I guess, talking to each other at some point, talking to bits of the road, maybe, or
and
road signs.
and
That
bits of it talking to bits of other bits of it. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so every time you add something new, you potentially add a new weakness in, I suppose. So I guess what you're trying to
Yes.
do is build something that is built secure, so that you can add things in and not be always adding risk and having to re-engineer everything. Is that right, or am I just
Uh, that's also true, but I think the essence of it is the complexity of it. So exactly, it's because it's got many components, and if you add more to them, And when I say components, it could be, a software element. So a very good example these days is, this notion of software driven vehicles, where they're wanting to use software for a number of features that traditionally perhaps would have used hard electronics or mechanical component. And software in itself is built on many libraries that it uses, other interfaces that it uses, and so on. And it brings its own complexity. So it's that complexity really that I think we need to appreciate. And my attempt to represent the system's view of it is really just representing the fact that it's not just the software of it, right? It is so many other things around it, both that could act as threats or could act as drivers, but we just need to factor them into the security conversation. That's all there is really.
That's really
Um,
interesting.
and of course,
Is it,
AI. And I know
well,
you've got the picture of AI behind you. So
yes, and created by AI as well. So yeah, I mean, I mean, obviously, I know AI has been around for a long time, and but it feels like in the last 18 months, maybe 2 years, that with the large language models, ChatGPT, etc., Gemini, or Bard, all these other new bits of tool arriving, that AI has just accelerated, a million percent. And this whole channel is about using AI to do everyday tasks, to make life easier, to have some more fun, that sort of thing. But in the system security area, what is AI having an impact at all? Is it a big deal? Is it a little deal? Where does it fit in?
yeah, so the nature of these systems that I was referring to, well, one, the different features and components, AI is becoming part of it.
Mm,
And I use the term AI very broadly here. So apologies to the AI experts here, but my attempt here, I'll use the word AI, but really it represents any element of from very even kind of linear sensing to some actual smart intelligence, and anything that falls in between. So that level of AI is seeping in to these systems and serving a number of purposes, so to help reinforce some traditional kind of properties that we expect. So in the world of automotive, for example, safety, using some sensors to detect if there's a pedestrian on the road in the dark or something, and you can process that data, and some aspect of AI or some learning could be used to then inform the actuators to say, okay, well, there is an object in front of us and we need to stop or so on, or be aware of it, or it's a hazard and so on. And so I
mm,
think that is all good, but of course, with that intelligence comes the need to represent that intelligence and that behavior that could be done smartly, autonomously, whatever, and that may make things complicated, right?
yeah,
To guarantee a certain security, a certain property of a security, or even safety, because then you have to reason about that component, and it's the very reasoning that we are trying to really give over to the machines, right? So the machines could then detect and reason, maybe.
so
Uh,
I don't know if you saw, you might not have seen my last video, but I looked at ChatGPT o1 preview, which sets out its reasoning. So I think talks about having reasoning built in for the first time. And of course, I challenged it with the idea of having to make a car having to make a decision about driving into a group of pedestrians, or when a child runs out, or cars crashing into the back of it. And very interesting, the how it went through the process of making the decision of what it should do. I think there's, isn't it called the trolley uh,
Yeah,
dilemma.
there's a trolley problem. That's right.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I think it's the same. It's the same thing. But if you have a look in my last video, you'll find what O1 Preview did. And interestingly, it sets out its reasoning. You know, what are the parameters? What decisions could I make? What are the likely outcomes? And then make a judgment about the strength or weaknesses. And it takes some time, and then lays out its weaknesses. So it's clearly coming. It doesn't feel. I realize we're not there yet, but it feels like we're on a journey where at some point we are going to sort of hand over these big decisions to things that we don't have immediate control over. And I know that when I did a video on cheating, so using ChatGPT for learning but not for cheating, and I make the point a lot that we can't trust everything that they produce, and therefore you have to take responsibility for what it, it's no good
Yeah.
going into ChatGPT and say, write me an essay for Professor Shaikh
Yeah.
on system security, and then just hand it in. It will make mistakes, it won't be right, and you have to take responsibility for whatever you put in there. So I think there are some really difficult issues to grapple with, especially as we get to pushing AI to do these really tricky questions. And I guess that those and as AI becomes more embedded into your systems, I guess one of the challenges is that we don't understand it very well, do we? I mean, certainly I don't. It feels black boxy. You ask it something, it goes off and it searches. It draws from it, does some thinking. The algorithm produces its magic, and then it produces something back. But you don't see all that working. You don't know what data it's been trained with. You don't know whether that data is really accurate or whether it's uh, bias in some way. And I talk about that as well. So and I guess in these systems that you start adding these things together, they can become a very big issue, can't they? And it'll learn from its own mistakes, and it might keep repeating them rather than you
Yeah.
know
Yeah. No, no, absolutely. And I think that the risks are there. And so let's step outside of the automotive context, because of course that's an area which has had a long history of long tradition of safety, and there are lots of reasons for how things are done and so on. But just as just a general kind of a example, um, what's so yeah, we'll talk about the risks, but what this well how I approach the kind of risks around AI is, I'd like to think, first of all, I'm thinking very hard about what is the purpose of AI, right? So broadly, I put it under two very blunt kind of camps. One is I see it as an extension of automation, right? So we've had automation, since the industrial revolution, probably, prior to that as well in various forms. And then automation has a number of advantages, right? So we can, we mechanize certain things, and then we can repeat the process. It's all consistent, standard, and then we can make it efficient and cost efficient and efficient in many ways, and so on. And I see, I say this to a lot of my colleagues in industry as well. I like to think various manifestations of AI as intelligent automation, where you're automating things, but making it a little more intelligent. A bit going back to the automotive example, a bit like detecting pedestrians, but you've kind of brought a little bit of automation to it, right? And so that may be that the vehicle learns that my usual space where we park, or if it's a home location, there's a certain bollard and so on, and that's there, but I may not, I don't have to beep, because the driver's well aware of it, or it's well marked or something like this, right? But I have to still beep, if I see a pedestrian, and pedestrians could come in different shapes and forms and sizes and so on. And maybe it learns that through the driver behavior. So there is intelligent automation as such. And the other part of it is the intelligence itself, right? And when I think about intelligence, well, I think about how, what does it mean? Well, what does natural intelligence mean, right? So how do we become intelligent? And I think there is a process which we go through. Part of it is social, right? We exchange ideas, learn things, and so on, and we attach values to it as well. Part of it is experiential, so through experience. So there are certain senses, that we use, all kinds of senses we use to then learn about things. And there is also emotional as well, right? Um, I am very careful as to how I would deduce or share my insight in certain configurations if I'm sitting one to one with you, or if I'm sitting in a group of people. And I just think intelligence as such, natural intelligence, human intelligence, whatever, is so, there are so many layers to it, right? And then if you think about it, then if you come back to AI, then I think the difficulty is that, there is a lot we're missing out on right there. And I mean, as academics, one concern is that human expertise, the way we've kind of, and human intelligence, the way we've kind of learned and developed and evolved, there is so much around it. And some of it is so tacit, so inherent, so hidden, perhaps, that even we haven't figured out, right? Ourselves. And all I'm saying is we need to be mindful as to how we don't lose that, because I think there are benefits to that process, right?
I think it's a really interesting point, and I guess it's one I hadn't really thought through. But you're right that, I mean, humans don't agree on stuff. We argue about stuff. We don't get it right. If we think about our partners, how often do we misstep or say something that upsets or whatever, and that those sorts of things, and that getting stuff wrong and learning from it and responding is a really important part of development, isn't it? And learning new things. It was interesting. So on the video I was talking about, I I put in one of the dilemmas around AI stopping wars. Does and one of the answers is it could wipe out humanity and then there'd be no more wars. But actually understood and made the case that actually wars help technological development and those sorts of things. Gosh, that's quite interesting. That it didn't have a very clear line on whether war was good or bad, and made a case that in some cases, in many cases, war is helpful. So, but actually, as we get, because obviously what we try and do, what I did was I sat down asking the AI questions, looking for the right answer. But actually, how do you make sure that it gives you the wrong answer? And they argue with each other and sort it out, especially with these really complex issues. And maybe that's one of the that's a measure that isn't part of the Turing test. It's just about asking questions and getting
Yeah.
answers, whereas actually to gain that real intelligence,
Yeah.
it needs to be able to get things wrong, argue about stuff, discuss it, come to a conclusion, a compromise, and then change your mind. Because
Mhm.
actually that's, I think you're right that there is something in that question about intelligence that is more than just, can I get the right answer?
Yeah, I guess so. And I think, once again, going back to intelligent automation, I don't want to sound dismissive. I'm not actually. I think that it's so useful, right? In a sense, Um, I mean, going back to the systems security and the use of generative AI or other aspects of AI, one example, of course, is, and this is a great example actually, is and I've come across this in some research that we've started doing, where so part of security is to understand threats, and threat intelligence essentially represents this kind of, once again we talk about intelligence, but understands the nature of threats to a system, and some of them may be completely new ways of manipulating a system for malicious purposes, essentially a threat. And and part of it is about understanding the different new threats. And what we're looking at now is using AI. If you model a system, then use AI to discover new ways, or new threats, where perhaps a threat may discover that actually, if you tinker this with component C and component B, and this is the way they're linked, then you could reach to this malicious stage, which could, you know, uh, be something that you may not have thought about before, right? So that's great. And to do it automatically, as in what I say, intelligent automation, do it quickly, on the go all the time. And in a sense, as you said earlier, these systems are dynamic, they're changing. And so if you have an AI kind of like an AI attacker all the time with you, just running through those iterations, that could be ideal, right?
But it's good
Eh,
if it's on your side. What if
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
what if it's on the enemy's side?
Well, exactly. I mean, that's the other part of it, right? So if we can use it, then then they can use it as well. And I mean, even in this process, we validate them, right? We validate these threats because it may sometimes throw up some options that are not plausible, not feasible, just because we make a human judgment around it, or there is some aspect of the model that is lacking, and so on. And I think that type of intelligence is really useful. But then once again, the human expertise used to validate it is something that is important, and goes back to my other point that we carry so much, in terms of kind of social knowledge, emotional kind of a knowledge as well, and intelligence, that we need to kind of use that for this. So going back to, just want to reiterate my point. My point here is that for people who are learning through AI, I just I just think they need to appreciate that. And one little insight maybe for our viewers here today as well is, if ChatGPT, and which is which is a very common use case, unfortunately, in universities, is used to come up with some kind of reasoning, right? Some kind of a dialogue. Then my advice to the users would be to at least practice the dialogue with someone else or with yourself, just because that kind of logic that is filtering through that dialogue is something you capture. And in that way, ChatGPT, or whatever different manifestation of a language model could be, or would be, could be quite useful, actually. It becomes like a conversational partner, right?
Yeah, and I think I agree with you. And I think at its strength, it is about having to about the ability to have a conversation with it. You got
Yeah.
some data, you want to look at it, you can effectively have a conversation with the data, but you're inputting into that conversation. If on the reasoning stuff, I think is interesting because it helps you to work through the reasoning yourself, but you still have to have responsibility for that what you use it for. And if you're just handing over all of that responsibility to the machine, you're going to get into trouble quite quickly, I think, because
Yeah. Yeah.
uh it's not it's not good enough yet. But I don't know. It seems to be moving very quickly towards something that is, I regularly get my socks blown off. I regularly go, wow, that
Yeah,
is unbelievable. If
yeah,
you look at, I've just completed a video that will have been out a few days ago on using Midjourney to create graphics, and I can now have a conversation with a browser and produce cinematic quality graphics.
yeah.
Now, I'm not an artist. I'm not a, but the ability, its ability to understand a conversation and to have a conversation about something and then respond to it is improving at breakneck speed. So I just wonder, do you think that in a year's time or in 5 years' time, you will still be quite as concerned about its ability to reason? Or do you think that will always be there in some way? Where do you see this technology going? What's going to blow my socks off in the next 6 months?
So I think it'll continue to. I think it'll continue to improve,
Mm,
and the reasoning element, could come through. I think the creative element could be quite interesting, right? So I have this. I mean, this may be very, this may be happening already, or will probably happen very soon by the time this video goes out at the pace that things are developing. But I have this vision that very soon, having heard AI generated music and videos and everything else, I think very soon you'll get a portal, something like one of these popular movie platforms. I'm not going to name them, and you would say, I want to watch a rom-com with these two actors set in Paris in 1963, with a plot twist at the end that leads to this.
mm.
And it'll take 3 seconds and it'll come up with a whole movie. Can you imagine, right?
But I think you're right. I think so. So there are some conversations on YouTube, and I just can't remember the guy's name, but
Yeah.
he's a content creator, and he's talking about individualized movies.
Yeah.
So
So
exactly that,
yeah.
exactly what
So
you
so you ingest all the outputs from Hollywood and Bollywood and Lollywood and whatever all over the world, and BFI, and you just put it in an engine, and you just then give it prompts, and voila, a movie comes up. And every evening you're watching something customized, and it's unbelievable, but that could happen. But I think I think it could. I mean, this is where I think this could be quite interesting. I think it could then be so intelligent or smart where it portrays characters, some of the well-known A-lister, movie
Mm.
characters and so on, and the celebrities. It could portray characters in a depth, picking out things that perhaps we may not have picked out. It may actually detect, based on hundreds of hours of TV or movie production,
Yeah,
that a certain celebrity actually may carry a certain emotional state which we haven't figured out. I don't know. It may actually lead to a diagnosis of some kind. I mean, that's scary, right? If you think
maybe
about it,
next time we do, maybe next time we have this chat, I will be just an AI driven professor.
I hope not. I hope not, really. But I think I really do worry about the authenticity, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I think that human element of it as well, and so on. But one other thing that, talking about risks here, Paul, is my other concern here is that we could all end up with our own individual versions of reality,
yeah.
and it may get to a point where we're so, and it's happening already. I mean, deep fake news, you really it's really scary as
It
to
is.
what the truth is out there, because we need that, right? And
I think
so,
a lot. Certainly, if I think about some of the young people I know, they're so invested in TikTok and YouTube and Snapchat. I'm not even sure what these things are, some of them, but they're so invested in that. That's their reality,
mm,
and there's there's a human being sat next to them, might like a cuddle or something, and it's like
yeah,
we've got to. But I wonder whether, so maybe this is an interesting point. So if we say everything that you can do on a computer at some point in the future can be done by AI. Everything you can do in front of a screen will be done by AI, and quite a lot of other things that are not done on a computer, acting maybe or whatever,
mm,
lawyer, being a lawyer, being an accountant, all of these jobs could be taken over. Being a professor can all be taken over by AI. That leaves people with a lot of spare time and and potentially a way to, they're going to have to fill that time with things that are interesting and rewarding, but also how they're going to earn money and survive. And these are I think these are questions that are perhaps not right on us now, but I think they're not far away. I look in my team, and we can increase our activity 10 times by using AI to support us. It only gets us 90% of the way there, but then we focus our time on the 10% rather than on the 90, starting things from scratch. You can get AI to really move you forward. But at some point, that's going to mean, I guess, or maybe not, that's going to mean you don't need as many people. Or you get to a stage, I do lots of bids. We might get to the stage where bids are being written by AI, measured by scored by AI, awarded by the AI, and actually no human's been involved in any of that. And then there's a product at the end that requires some human interaction. I don't think we're there, and we
yeah,
might never be there, but there are some concerns I have about the impacts on society, and how do we help. What would be your advice to young children your children, about what are the skills they need, what should they be wary of, what should they develop, those sorts of things in a world that is potentially going to be dominated by new technology that we don't absolutely understand yet.
yeah. So I think we need to embrace the technology, and I think, um, I mean, I have those concerns as well. But I think if we embrace it in our very own individual, customized way, we use it for our better productivity for ourselves, for sure. But equally, we kind of use it as, as aids for our work. And I think this is where I get excited and I hope some of these tools go into this direction where, they become kind of digital coaches for us, right? Where they could, I don't know, observe or, through this recording, for example, if I get some feedback to say, you made this point far more clearly than this other point, perhaps it's the lack of terminology in this area, right? Or something along those lines. I mean, I know of a tool that allows me to now just take notes in a meeting, an online meeting, and give me a nice organized set of notes at the end with some key action points. So every time we agree as a group, as a collective group on some actions, it it makes a list of it at the end automatically, which is fantastic, right? It just, I mean, it's just, it's so good, with so many conversations that we do, it just really is useful. So I think we need to get better. We as intelligent beings need to be intelligent about the use of artificial intelligence, right? Maybe that's a tagline to be used somewhere. Feel free to have it. but um, but um, but I think the different problems or areas and problem domains that we deal with, we need to think about how we bring AI, and this will take leadership. And I think this is where, Paul, I think it's a subject that we can talk about, and maybe we can conclude after this. But I think what is missing at the minute is true kind of AI leadership, where once again, it's about just very simple things, right? So sustainability challenges, right? If we allow these AI models to somehow take into account the behaviors, to take into account the economics, the sustainability kind of constraints, and maybe suggest policies at a local level, and some of it is optimization, which is not necessarily something that is new. It's been going here, for years and years in theoretical computer science, where we kind of use genetic and evolutionary algorithms and evolutionary kind of developments, and we learn from them, right? And those algorithms essentially optimize based on that kind of natural learning to optimize things. And that optimization may mean that we learn that perhaps we don't need a garbage collection kind of truck every week. Maybe we need every other week or something. And this is how the behavior can adapt to it. And this may lead to a net reduction of emissions and so on. That's a very small, silly example, and so on. But there could be more sophisticated examples where we perhaps could feed in data from the soil, from the atmosphere, from the weather patterns, and so on, and really make, there are other problems like in social care, in healthcare, in economics, kind of for the economy, I mean, and so on. And I really think that we use this for that human beneficial purpose. We really need to. And this is the irony of it, Paul. I think we're getting really good in terms of that intelligence, but going back to human intelligence, I just think, we as a society are regressing, right? More conflict, unfortunately, more disagreement, um, more wastage very often. And that wastage is in terms of time, in terms of commitment, in terms of, material wastage. So we need to somehow, and particularly here in Britain, we need to, I think about that leadership. And I look to people like yourself, really. I mean, I think no, but think about it, right? So you came from a foreign office background, higher education sector. I know that you've been involved in various entrepreneurial journeys as well, which is right. So we've shared some of that. And yeah, but it's about understanding those complexities and having ownership of some of those issues and thinking about, yeah, how do we solve the Middle East? Well, that would be a start, but I'm just
See what ChatGPT comes up with.
you could
No,
try, but good luck.
yeah, it's that. I mean, it's a fascinating thought, and I agree with you. This whole area needs leadership and needs some group, people, body to just help us, help society to make the most out of it in this very positive way, to find those optimizations but also I think do it with because there's no point in having a big portion of society then disenfranchised and out. We need a more equal society, not a more unequal society. And we should, that should be our approach to using these tools, I think.
I think so. I think the governments have talked about in the past as well, and currently productivity, right?
Yeah.
In terms of AI, and I liked that because it gave AI a target, right? And what was it? Was it for the civil service to aim for 20% productivity or something through the use of AI? something along those lines. I absolutely. In fact, this is my you know my idea. I think we should definitely go towards 4 days a week, right?
Yeah.
Across all sectors or many sectors as possible, and we should challenge organizations to demonstrate, productivity gains while going for 4 days a week using AI, but also that productivity comes hand in hand with sustainability benefits.
Mm.
Less journeys, less emissions, less energy usage in terms of office spaces and so on. But equally, we need to perhaps factor in a better emotional state for people. Perhaps people are happy. I mean, I may want to take Wednesdays off rather than you may wish to take Fridays off or whatever, right? So my point is, we could be flexible in that sense, and we're both happy, right?
Yeah.
So, so I think we need to really up the ante on this in a
Mm.
sense and make some real societal shifts for some real gains. Otherwise, I just worry that you'll be watching too many movies, Paul.
So
Sitting at
it's
home.
interesting. I guess I'm as we sort of draw the conversation to a close, for somebody who spends a lot of their time thinking about risk and security and threat and those sorts of things, I'm comforted that you also see a positive way forward that needs some leadership, absolutely, but a life that might feel a bit more human for many people rather than slog for a lot of people, and that this technology might be something that can enable that.
I completely agree. And I think my plea, going back to my very first point, is I would just urge everyone to just think about, as you more think about more and more, not a week goes by without a story on AI and so on, to think about natural intelligence and why are we regressing? And what does intelligence really mean? Because it's not just about solving, sums and so on. It's about an emotional intelligence. It's about being a more caring, inclusive society, more diverse in many respects, but more joyful and more, we there are, I mean, there are lots of challenges, and a new government's come in. I'm very hopeful. And I know you've been to a certain party conference, and I won't name which one, but you may wish to. But but my point is, yeah, I mean, look, leadership and policies and politics. I mean, this is something we need to embrace even more.
I mean, on that point, I was at the Labour Party conference last week. I think about a quarter of all the events had something to do with AI. It was all the fringe events, and there were thousands. I
Yeah.
mean, loads. And so it's really is something where I think people are grappling with the opportunity. There's obviously a sales pitch there as well. There is a this will work in this area, but not in this area. There is how do we do it? Then you've got security questions. All of that's there, but I was pleased. I was interested and pleased to see that it was a very active conversation, and people were actively engaging in that discussion. Great. Look, I've really enjoyed that. What a great conversation.
You weren't expecting it, were you?
No, I obviously was expecting it. It's just, sometimes we would have a beer in our hand having this
Absolutely.
conversation, and it's nice to be able to do it so that we can share it with other people. But it's been a real pleasure, and you've certainly made me think, which is nice and good.
Well,
And I'm sure you'll have made the listeners think as well.
well, thank you very much for inviting me. I've definitely enjoyed this, Paul, and yeah, I just want to say, I think the journey that you're on with this kind of this creative side of you is really good. Exactly. I think my wish would be that, yes, we engage and we become more open minded. We I think this is the leadership of a kind because it's not driven by commercial platforms,
Mm.
which I know are driven by commercial drivers, right? We need that very free kind of space, free of commercial drivers, other things, and bringing those experiences. And exactly, and I think you're the right person to just facilitate those conversations across so many different communities and groups. So good luck.
Thank you. Well, it's been my absolute pleasure, and I'll say goodbye, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you. Bye.